Missy Setters is the executive director of the Radiance Technologies Independence Bowl. Miss Missy, welcome back. I was going to say Merry Christmas, but yeah, Merry Christmas. How you doing?
I'm okay. Still frustrated, but okay.
Let's start here. How did this happen? Walk us through the steps, the process, the dominoes. How did we get to the point where there's no game?
Well, I think you have to go back and look over the last few weeks, and you've had you started with 42 bowl games. You had 10 bowl games that decided prior to, I think, last week to not play this year, to cancel. And then you got to, as we got closer and closer to the selections, while we moved up in the selection order with the Pac-12 up to the 4th overall selection, you saw teams start opting out from playing in bowl games. And so it was kind of just a constant change in the entire process of how things worked out leading up to Selection Sunday. And then going into yesterday, we were prepared. And then at the last minute, another team decided to opt out after selections had already started. And so everything that the bowls had all been lining up kind of went into total chaos because of that one team opting out. And then that created a void here, and that void had to be filled by another team somewhere else. And it just had a domino effect. And then you had 4 more bowls yesterday that couldn't play because they couldn't fill their sides.
Just so folks know, let's clear that up, because it was 4 bowls yesterday, that including ours, that were canceled. But previously, did you say there were 20 bowl games that had already canceled because for a variety of reasons, most of them schools opting out?
10 games prior to selection yesterday had already decided not to play, and then 4 more yesterday.
So if you're looking at social media, and I would suggest you not, basically everybody is saying, and it's kind of a legit question, it's COVID football season. Every team everywhere is eligible. We already had one team. All we had to do was get one more team. How could we not?
If I was on the outside looking in, I would ask the same question. And my answer is that you had 50 teams that opted out. You have 120-something, I think, teams that play in FBS. And you had over 50 teams that opted out. In a normal year with 42 bowl games, you need 84 teams to play. And so obviously that wasn't going to work, but it ended up being a numbers game, and where it depends on, where your contracts lie, where your agreements lie. And then I can tell you on an annual basis for years now, the 2 to 3 weeks leading up to our bowl selection day has been spent for us calling multiple conferences, asking and looking at the standings and saying, okay, do you think you're going to have any additional teams? Can we work into your lineup, that kind of thing? So it's an ongoing process for us and some other bowls based on where you are in the selection order. And it was no different this year. We started that a couple of weeks out, and usually we keep in contact with some of the conferences along the way, too, and we have, other partnerships with them in different years. But leading up to it, once you had 4 bowl games in the Pac-12's lineup that fell out, that decided not to play this year. So we were in the 4th selection. You think you're good, but you still prepare just in case something happens. And it did. And you saw, like I said, over 50 teams that opted out. And multiple teams opted out the day before selections. And then you had that one team that opted out on the day of the selections once selections had started. And that creates even more chaos. You can prepare, but when something like that happens, even though you may have something lined up, that can completely undo what was just done. And then you scramble and you start calling conferences again. Do you have anyone that's willing to play? And I know a lot of people are asking, well, if records didn't matter this year, then how come you couldn't fill these bowl games? But even though the records didn't matter, when you have 50-plus teams drop out, you still can't fill all of those bowls. And keep in mind, the Pac-12 is the only conference that chose to stick with the 500 rule, where their teams had to be 500 or better in order to be eligible for a bowl game this year.
If I wanted to blame somebody, and you don't necessarily have to, at least publicly, but if I wanted to blame somebody, would I be way out of line if I blamed the Pac-10? would I be way out of line if I pointed a finger at ESPN and at least suggested because they don't own our game that we're an independent bowl game, that they weren't maybe as much help as otherwise they might have been because they've got their owned and operated games to fill?
Me personally, instead of looking at someone to blame, and I know that's an initial reaction, and yes, we all go through that, I think it's important to look at the overall big picture. How did we get to this point? How do you make sure that it doesn't happen in the future, or do everything that you can to make sure it doesn't happen in the future? And I think it was a situation where you had so many moving parts this year, and even the picture that you thought you were looking at changed from 1 minute to the next. And I think there were a lot of casualties this year. I think you have to look at it from the standpoint of there's 14 bowl games not getting played. That's 14 cities that are not going to have their bowl games at a time where we desperately need things to bring us together. For us, the hardest part was not being able to do this for our city, not being able to do this for Radiance, and definitely not being able to offer Army at 9-2 a bowl game to play in. While you want to turn inward and say, who do I blame and who do I lash out at? I think it's more right now, at least where I am, is looking at, I'm so disappointed for our city, our foundation, our volunteers who put their time in, our title sponsor, and for Army in particular. And just, dealing with that right now and how do we get past that and move forward.
Speaking of title sponsor, Radiance Technologies, we got to give money back to Radiance Technologies and sponsors and seats. What's the story there? How are you going to handle that?
We'll have to sit down with them and talk through all of that. They're a fantastic sponsor, an amazing group of people. It's an employee-owned company. And they have a culture there that's second to none. And I think sitting down with them and, having those discussions, we're going to do what we can to get their commercial spots that should have run in our game, possibly placed in some other bowl games this year so they get that exposure. And they created some fantastic commercials, and we want people to see them, and we want people to know as much about them as possible and about the organization that they are. So, working to see what we can do for make goods on this, and then sitting down with them and talking through all of it.
Do you anticipate that they, meaning Radiance Technologies, do you anticipate they will be understanding of the situation in college football as a whole?
I think they're very savvy and very smart when it comes to that. I think they understand a lot of it now, and then as we talk through it, maybe we can lend some more insight. But at the same time, they've been understanding going through the process, but it's also sitting down and talking through the business aspect of it too. And that's important to them. It's important to us for the future of the relationship.
So obviously there's been no discussion with them about next season. In fact, let's just take that whole, let's just eat the rest of the apple, if you will. Radiance Technologies, a bowl game for next season. What are you thinking? What do you see in the future?
I think, we're lined up with Conference USA and BYU next year. And I think you look at the where they're playing right now, what bowl games they're in, how the success that BYU's having, and the program that they have there, and so I think it's just and I keep saying this, but I think it's sitting down and looking at what we have to accomplish over the next few weeks as far as getting with. And I know these are a lot of questions that people have is, what do you offer the ticket buyers, the sponsors, the people who bought parking passes in the last few weeks? How do we handle that? We're going to do it much like we did much like the schools did with their supporters. Give three options. Would you like to make it a donation for this year? Would you like to roll it over into next year? And or would you like a full refund? So that's what internally we'll do as a staff. We have an amazing staff, an amazing foundation and organization of hundreds of volunteers and members. We'll work through that in the coming weeks and get that process in place and reach out to everybody. And we'll work through this with Radiance and also with our volunteers and our members, too, just to kind of bring them up to speed on how everything happened. Yesterday was the most difficult day of my work life of I guess 33 years or something like that, and the disappointment is for the people on our staff who work so hard, our organization and members, and like I said, Radiance, the city, and this community, and for Army. And so right now you're in a bit of a funk for the next few days, but you've got a lot of work to do too.
One more quick question. I got a text last night after 10 o'clock from someone, I'm not going to tell you the name, but you would know. And they are very knowledgeable and connected with college football beyond this region. And what their text said to me was, Missy Setters almost pulled off a miracle. Did you?
We thought we had it up until about probably 1:15, 2 o'clock. We still felt good. And then about 4:30 or 5 o'clock, the rug got completely pulled out from underneath us.